The ICU door shook once. Not from an explosion, just pressure, controlled, deliberate. Inside, machines kept breathing for people who could not. A nurse stood at the medication cart, reading a chart, her voice low, steady, as alarms began to overlap. Security rushed past her without a word. Doctors whispered. Someone locked the trauma wing. Then a voice came over the hospital PA. Not panicked, not loud, measured, professional. The nurse looked up. She adjusted the badge on her scrubs and quietly said one sentence that made everyone in the room stop moving. They thought she was just a nurse. They were wrong. The hospital after midnight felt thinner, not quieter. Machines still hummed, monitors still chirped, but stretched like everything was holding its breath. Fluorescent lights washed the ICU corridor in a pale blue glow. Polished floors reflected ceiling panels and the slow movement of night staff. Every sound carried farther than it should have. A cart was squeaking once before being fixed, a pager vibrating against a counter, a distant elevator bell. She moved through it all without drawing attention. Her name badge said registered nurse. Navy blue scrubs. Hair tied tight at the back of her head. No jewelry. No phone in her pocket. She walked with an economy that came from habit, not hurry. She stopped at bed 12. The patient's vitals were steady, but fragile. Ventilator rhythm clean. For lines labeled, taped, aligned. She checked each one in the same order every time, left to right, top to bottom. When she adjusted the drip rate, she did it once. No corrections. No second glance. A junior resident hovered nearby, pretending not to watch her hands. Anything? He asked. Stable, she said. One word. No reassurance layered on top. He nodded, relieved, and moved on. That was how most interactions went. People took what they needed from her: information, compliance, silence, and passed through. She did not fill space. She did not compete. AT, the central station. Two doctors spoke in low voices over a tablet. Security cameras flickered on a wall-mounted monitor behind them. One of the feeds showed the ambulance bay. Empty. Another showed the east entrance, glass doors reflecting streetlights. She glanced at the screens as she passed. Just a glance. Long enough to register angles, blind spots, the position of security guard leaning too much on one leg. She logged medication administration with neat, compact handwriting. No wasted motion. No flourish. "Hey," a charge nurse said, leaning back in her chair. "You're floating again tonight?" "Yes. ICU hates floats." "I know." That was the end of it. The trauma alarm chimed somewhere deep in the building, then cut off abruptly. False start. The hospital breathed again. She refilled her cart, restocking syringes and saline in exact quantities. She didn't overfill. She didn't leave gaps. When she closed a drawer, nothing rattled. Across the ward, a patient cried out in confusion. She was there before the aide finished standing up. Her voice stayed low, even close to the ear. The patient settled. Heart rate came down. NO1 thanked her. No one needed a AT1 17 a.m. The air changed. IT was subtle. Nothing dramatic. No alarms. No shouting. Just a delay that a phone rang at the desk. Rang longer than it should have. The clerk answered, listened, frowned slightly, then hung up without speaking. "What was that?" one of the doctors asked. Security rerouting, the clerk said. "Nothing urgent." The nurse was already moving. She didn't run. She adjusted her path, took the long corridor instead of the short one, passing a supply room she hadn't planned to check. Inside, she verified inventory with her eyes only. Oxygen tank secured. Crash cart sealed. She paused at a window that looked down onto the street. Two vehicles sat at the curb where there was usually one. Engines running. Headlights off. She noted it. Filed it. Moved on. In the medication room. She washed her hands longer than required. Dried them completely. She checked the wall clock. Not the digital one, the analog. Seconds mattered more than minutes. Overhead, the hospital announcement system crackled, then went quiet again. A security guard hurried past, speaking into his radio. His voice was tight. He didn't look at her. She stepped aside to let him pass, eyes down, posture neutral. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, another night shift nurse staying out of the way. But when the guard disappeared around the corner, she changed direction. She headed toward the ICU entrance doors and stood there, hands folded loosely in front of her, as if waiting for an assignment. Behind the glass, patients slept under controlled light. Machines did their work. Lives balanced on routine. She listened. Somewhere in the building, a door closed that shouldn't have. She exhaled once. Slow, controlled, and waited. The first lockdown was not announced. IT arrived sideways. Through absence, a set of automatic doors near the east wing failed to reopen after a stretcher passed through. A nurse tapped the sensor once, then again, harder. The door stayed shut. She frowned, waved for maintenance, and turned back toward the ward. Down the hall, the protagonist felt it without seeing it. She had just finished updating a chart when the building's airflow shifted, pressure equalizing where it shouldn't. Hospitals were designed to breathe in specific patterns. Isolation rooms, surgical suites, emergency corridors. This was wrong. She looked up. Across the unit, a monitor flickered and stabilized. No alarm. No alert. Just a hiccup. "Do we get memo?" a respiratory therapist asked the room, half joking. "No," someone said. "Why?" Fields closed. The word hung there to AT, the central station, a red indicator light, blinked once on the access panel, then went steady. A clerk leaned closer to the screen. "That's weird." "What is?" the charge nurse asked. "East Wing just went restricted. I didn't authorize it." The charge nurse picked up the phone. It rang twice, then went to hold music. She hung up and tried another extension that had no answer. The protagonist slid a medication tray into its slot and wiped her hands. She did not look at the others when she spoke. "Which doors?" she asked. The charge nurse glanced at her, surprised by the question. East Wing. Ambulance corridor 2, I think." "ICU access?" "No, not yet." Not yet. The words mattered. She nodded once and walked away before anyone could assign meaning to it. Her pace remained steady, but her path shifted again. She avoided main corridors, using staff-only passages and stairwells that smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. As she moved, she counted cameras without looking directly at them. Dome, fixed, blind corner, coverage ATA supply checkpoint. She paused to scan a badge. The light turned green. She stepped through and let the door close behind her, listening to the lock engage fully before continuing. Overhead, the hospital announcement system chimed. "Attention all staff," a calm voice began, too calm. "This is a partial access restriction. Please remain in your assigned units until further notice." No explanation. No end time. Murmurs followed the announcement. Phones came out. Texts were sent. People asked questions into the air, not anyone specific. The protagonist stopped near a window overlooking the ambulance bay. One of the vehicles she had seen earlier was gone. The other remained, engines still running. A man stood near the driver's side, speaking into a phone. He wore a jacket too heavy for the temperature. His stance was wrong, weight balanced forward, ready to move. A second man appeared briefly near the loading doors, then vanished inside. She watched until they disappeared from view, then turned away. Back in the ICU, tension crept in quietly. Doctor spoke more sharply. A nurse double-checked the dosage she already knew was correct. Someone laughed too loud and stopped abruptly. Security! Radios crackled more often now. Snippets of conversation bled into the ward. Confirm perimeter. No visual on. Hold position. The protagonist adjusted a patient's blanket, smoothing it flat, then checked the 4-line again. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was slow. A young nurse approached her, lowering her voice. "Do you think this is serious?" The question was not really a question. It was fear looking for permission. She met the nurse's eyes. "Do your checks," she said. "Stay with your patients." That was all. The young nurse nodded, relieved to have something solid to do. At the far end of the unit, a security guard appeared at the glass doors. He spoke briefly to the charge nurse through the intercom. His face was tight. He did not smile. When the call ended, The charge nurse exhaled sharply. "Okay," she said. "No one leave the unit unless cleared. We're locking internal doors as a precaution." A precaution. The protagonist moved closer to the doors as they sealed, listening to the locks engage. She noted the timing. Slight delay on the third latch. Mechanical, not electronic. She filed it away. A pager vibrated at her hip. Not her own, someone else's, left unattended on the counter. The message displayed briefly before timing out. Unconfirmed threat. Stand by. She didn't touch the pager. She didn't need to. Somewhere beyond the ward, a heavy sound echoed through the building. Not loud enough to be an impact. Too deliberate to be accidental. The ICU fell quiet. Machines kept working. Patients slept or drifted. Life continued, fragile and contained. The protagonist stood near the doors, hands resting lightly at her sides, eyes unfocused in a way that suggested rest. But she was listening to everything, waiting for the moment when waiting would no longer be an option. The first scream did not come from the ICU. It came through the ventilation system, muffled, distant, cut short. Heads turned. A monitor beeped once in protest as a patient shifted in bed. Somewhere, a metal object struck tile. The sound carried farther than it should have. Security radios erupted all at once. Breach at loading. Weapons visible. Fall back. The channel dissolved into static. The charge nurse stood up, so fast her chair rolled backward. "Okay," she said, voice tight but controlled. "Everyone stay calm. Lock your bays. No one opens anything unless it's me." The ICU doors were already sealed. The protagonist stepped closer to the glass, peering out into the corridor beyond. Movement flickered at the far end, shadows cutting across light. Fast and purposeful. Not running. Advancing. She didn't speak. A second announcement came over the PA. This one was different. The comm was forced now. "All staff, this is a full lockdown. Repeat, full lockdown. Follow shelter protocols immediately." The word shelter landed heavily. Doctors began moving patients deeper into the unit. Curtains were drawn. Lights dimmed. Someone started crying quietly near bed 7, hands shaking as she adjusted a ventilator. The protagonist took the ventilator from her, without comment, and finished the adjustment herself. One turn. Correct pressure. She gave the nurse a nod and moved on. At the security console inside the ICU, camera feeds flickered again. One by one, hallways went dark. Then one feed stabilized long enough to show 3 men advancing down a corridor. They wore no uniforms, no insignia. Civilian clothes layered wrong for speed. Their weapons were carried low, muzzles disciplined. Not criminals, not amateurs. The charge nurse leaned in. "Oh my God!" The protagonist watched without reacting. She noted spacing, angles, the way one man paused at an intersection to cover the others. She memorized their rhythm. "They're coming this way," a doctor whispered. "Yes," the protagonist said quietly. The word was not reassurance. It was confirmation. A heavy impact struck somewhere close, metal on reinforced glass. Once. Then again. Testing. The ICU doors shuddered but held. Someone sobbed openly now. The protagonist moved to the supply cabinet near the nurse's station and opened it. Inside were gloves, masks, gowns. Nothing useful for what was coming, unless you knew how to use it. She took a roll of tape and tore off 3 strips, sticking them neatly to the edge of the counter. Then she closed the cabinet. "Why are you doing that?" the charge nurse asked, voice rising. The protagonist didn't answer. She walked to bed 14, where an elderly man lay unconscious, chest rising mechanically. She checked his restraints, not for him, but for the bed. Wheels locked, frame solid. A crash echoed from the corridor. Glass shattered. Shouts followed, sharp and urgent, in a language not everyone understood. The ICU doors rattled violently now. "Security?" the charge nurse called into the phone. "Security, respond." Only static answered. The protagonist positioned herself slightly to the side of the doors, not directly in front of them. She lowered herself into a half-kneel behind the nurse's station, using the counter as cover. To anyone watching, it looked like fear. It wasn't. She was calculating. The doors buckled inward as a tool. Crowbar, maybe, was driven into the seam. The metal screamed in protest. Screws popped loose one by one. A final blow sent the right door swinging inward. A man stepped through, weapon raised. He froze. It wasn't. She was calculating. The doors buckled inward as a tool. Crowbar, maybe, was driven into the seam. The metal screamed in protest. Screws popped loose one by one. A final blow sent the right door swinging inward. A man stepped through, weapon raised. He froze. Not because of the gun trained on him. There wasn't one. Because the room didn't react the way it should have. No one rushed him. No one screamed. The ICU was quiet in the wrong way. Controlled. Watching. The protagonist stood up slowly, hands visible, posture neutral. She took one step forward, placing herself between the man and the patients behind her. ICU, she said calmly. Critical care. You don't want to be here. The man's eyes flicked past her, scanning equipment, beds, bodies. His finger tightened slightly on the trigger. Move, he said. She didn't. Instead, she tilted her head just enough to suggest listening, as if she could hear something he couldn't. Behind him, in the corridor, footsteps approached, his people moving to support. She met his gaze again, steady and unafraid. Not this room, she said quietly. For half a second, uncertainty crossed his face. It was enough. The moment passed quickly. No violence, no heroics, but it cost her. When he shoved past her, the weapon struck her ribs hard enough to steal her breath. She absorbed the impact without a sound, turning with it, letting it glance instead of drive. He moved on, deeper into the ward, barking orders to his men. She stayed on her feet. No one noticed the way her hand pressed briefly against her side, measuring damage. No one noticed the way her eyes followed the attackers, already planning around them. The siege had reached the ICU, and it was no longer theoretical. The attackers moved with intention. Two of them fanned out immediately, weapons sweeping low across the room. Not searching patients, controlling space. The third stayed near the doors, back to the corridor, guarding their exit. Everyone stay where you are, the lead man said. His voice was flat. Professional. Do exactly what you're told and nobody gets hurt. No one answered. Doctors froze with hands half raised. A nurse dropped a clipboard. It hit the floor and slid several feet, the sound loud in the stillness. The protagonist remained where she was, slightly forward the others, close enough to be noticed but not challenged. Her hand stayed open, empty. One of the attackers noticed her then. His gaze lingered longer than the rest. You, he said, step back. She didn't argue. She took one measured step, only one, then stopped. Behind her, a ventilator alarm chirped briefly. A patient's oxygen saturation dipped. The machine compensated, but the sound cut through the tension. The attacker nearest the bed turned his head toward it. Distracted for just a moment, the protagonist moved. Not fast, not sudden. She shifted her weight and reached for the ventilator tubing, eyes down, posture submissive. To anyone watching, she was just a nurse doing what nurses did, fixing a problem. Hey! The man near the bed snapped, raising his weapon slightly. I need 10 seconds, she said, voice calm, almost bored. Or he dies. The attacker hesitated, not because he cared about the patient, but because the statement was clean, certain, no pleading. 10 seconds was nothing. Fine, he said. Make it quick. She nodded once and turned fully toward the bed, putting her body between the man and the patient. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, silencing the alarm, stabilizing the line. As she worked, she listened. Footsteps in the corridor outside. One set. Heavy. Rushed. A voice shouted something from beyond the ICU. Urgent, angry. The man at the door responded sharply, tension spiking. The attacker closest to her shifted his stance. Attention split between the hallway and her hands. That was the mistake. She finished the adjustment and straightened slowly. As she did, she took a half step sideways, not away from him, but just off his line. It forced him to reorient just slightly. Back, he said, more force now. Now. She met his eyes, not with defiance, with assessment. In that instant, he saw it, the absence of fear, the precision of her movement, the way her shoulders stayed loose, ready. His grip tightened reflexively, too tight. She acted before he understood why. Her left hand came up, not striking, but redirecting, pushing the barrel just enough that it no longer covered the room. Her right hand followed, driving into the soft space beneath his rib cage, exactly where the body betrayed itself under pressure. He gasped involuntarily. She stepped in close, using her weight and his imbalance. Her forearm pressed against his throat, not crushing, just enough to disrupt his breath. She leaned in, voice low, controlled. Don't, she said. It wasn't a threat. It was instruction. He stumbled back, choking, crashing into a supply cart. The noise drew immediate attention. Contact, the man at the door shouted, swinging his weapon toward them. The protagonist released her hold instantly and stepped back, hands raised again, posture compliant. The attacker she had disabled slid down the cart, coughing violently, weapon clattering to the floor. For a split second, no one moved. Then chaos surged back in. The lead attacker stormed forward, grabbing her by the collar and slamming her against the counter. Pain exploded across her side, where she had already been struck. This time, she couldn't fully hide it. Air left her lungs in a sharp exhale. "What did you do?" he demanded, weapon pressed hard into her abdomen. She didn't answer, not because she was defiant, but because she was measuring. Distance to the bed, angle of the gun, the man's breathing, the position of his teammates. The coughing attacker was still down, struggling to recover. The others were focused on her now, exactly where she wanted them. The lead man shoved her away, disgusted. "Tie her up," he snapped. "We're moving." Two hands forced her wrists behind her back. Plastic restraints bit into her skin. She didn't resist. She let it happen. As they dragged her toward the wall, her vision blurred briefly. Pain radiated through her ribs. Something was cracked. She knew it instantly. She breathed through it. Around her, the ICU held its breath again. The attackers moved on, deeper into the hospital, convinced the threat had passed. They didn't realize the cost she had paid, or what she had just learned. Bound, hurting, pressed against cold tile, the protagonist lowered her head slightly, not in defeat, in focus. The restraints cut into her wrists when they shoved her down. She let her knees bend with the force, absorbing it, turning the fall into a controlled slide until her back met the wall. Cold tile, solid, familiar. The attackers moved on quickly. Boots faded down the corridor. Voices followed, clipped and urgent. They were regrouping, consolidating. The ICU was left behind in a fragile silence. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the charged nurse rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" "Yes," she said simply. No drama, no explanation. The charged nurse reached for the restraints. Her hands shook. "I'll get these off." "Not yet," the protagonist said. The charged nurse froze. "What?" "Give them 30 seconds, she said. "Let them clear the hallway." "How do you—" "Please," the protagonist said. "Calm, certain." The charged nurse hesitated, then nodded and stepped back, forcing herself to wait. The protagonist shifted her weight carefully, testing her ribs. The pain flared but stayed contained. Cracked, not punctured. Manageable. She looked around the ICU. Staff were scattered, some frozen, some crying silently. Patients unaware, machines still working. The room was intact, but only just— "Listen to me," she said, raising her voice only enough to carry. Not loud, not commanding. Clear, heads turned. "We are sealing this unit fully," she continued. "No lights, no alarms unless life-threatening. Move patients away from glass. Beds locked, curtains open." A doctor blinked. "We don't have authorization." "They will not come back here," she said, meeting his eyes. "But if they do, we do not look like a target." Something in her tone cut through the resistance. Not force. Confidence. The doctor nodded. Do it, he told the others. They moved. Lights dimmed further. Curtains shifted. Equipment was repositioned quietly. The ICU transformed from a bright, active ward into something subdued, almost empty. The charge nurse cut the restraints with trauma shears. As soon as her hands were free, the protagonist rotated her wrists once, checking circulation. She flexed her fingers. Fine. She stood slowly, controlling her breath. What do you need? The charge nurse asked. The protagonist thought for half a second. Then, a phone that's still a signal, and access to the internal comms panel. The charge nurse stared at her. That panel is restricted. Yes. A beat. Then the charge nurse turned and walked toward it anyway. The protagonist followed, posture steady despite the pain. She positioned herself at the panel, scanning the interface. Her fingers hovered, then moved. Fast, precise. How do you know? The clerk started. Quiet, she said, not sharply. Just enough. She rerouted internal audio to specific zones only. Limited broadcast. Controlled. ICU is secure, she said into the mic. Trauma wing is compromised. Do not evacuate. Shelter and hold. Her voice carried through selected speakers, measured, unpanicked. On the other end, someone responded instantly. Not hospital staff. Say again, a male voice said. Controlled. Alert. She paused. Just long enough. Negative, she said. Hold position. Do not engage yet. Silence followed. Then understood. The line went dead. The charge nurse stared at her. Who was that? The protagonist turned away from the panel. Someone who listens. She pressed a hand briefly to her side, steadying herself. Outside the ICU, the building groaned. Distant impacts shouted orders. The echo of boots. The siege was tightening. Inside, however, the unit was calmer than it had been all night, because without ever saying she was in charge, she was minutes stretched, not the slow kind, the dangerous kind, where nothing happened and everything happened at once. Through intermittent camera feeds, they saw attackers moving deeper into the hospital, administrative offices, surgical prep, hostage control points forming without announcement. They were not here for money. They were here for leverage. The protagonist stood near the nurse's station, watching screens that flickered between static and brief clarity. Her breathing was shallow now, controlled. Each inhale measured against the pain in her ribs. A doctor approached quietly. They're asking for transport, he said. They want an ambulance cleared. She nodded. They will. That give them an exit. Yes. The doctor frowned. That's bad. No, she said. That give them a timeline. She turned back to the comms panel and keyed the mic again. Same restricted channel. Ambulance access will be prepared, she said evenly. No movement until confirmed. A reply came almost instantly. We're not ready. You will be, she said. They're disciplined. They won't rush. How do you know? Because they're afraid of something else. She cut the channel. Behind her, a patient's blood pressure dropped suddenly. A nurse moved to intervene, hands shaking. The protagonist was there immediately, guiding the nurse's hands without taking over. Adjusting, not replacing. Letting the nurse finish the task. Quiet competence. The cost came moments later. A gunshot echoed from somewhere above them. Not close, but close enough. A scream followed. Short. Cut off. The ICU staff flinched. The protagonist closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, then opened them again. A security guard appeared at the ICU doors, alone, injured, bleeding from the arm. He collapsed against a glass, pounding weakly. There, he gasped. They're forcing staff to... The doors were sealed. The charge nurse looked at the protagonist, eyes wide. We can't leave him. The protagonist assessed the hallway beyond the glass. No visible movement. No immediate threat. She made a decision. Open the door, she said. That breaks lockdown. Open it, she repeated. The charge nurse did. The protagonist moved first, pulling the guard inside, sealing the door again in one smooth motion. She guided him to the floor, applied pressure to the wound, tore open a dressing with her teeth when her hands were slick with blood. As she worked, the guard grabbed her sleeve. "They asked for you," he whispered. Her hands paused for half a beat. "Who did?" "The ones outside," he said. "They said the one giving orders." She finished the bandage and leaned back slightly. So they had noticed. The cost of control was exposure. She stood slowly, pain spiking hard enough that her vision narrowed. She wrote it out, face unreadable. "They won't get me," she said quietly. Not because she was confident, because she had already decided what she would trade instead. Somewhere in the hospital, footsteps changed direction, and the seeds shifted with them. They came for her, without warning. No shouting, no threats, just footsteps outside the ICU doors, measured, deliberate, and a knock that was almost polite. Everyone froze. The protagonist didn't move right away. She stood at the nurse's station, one hand resting lightly on the counter, eyes closed for a single breath. When she opened them, the decision was already made. "Do not open the doors," she said to the charge nurse. "No matter what happens next." "What are you going to do?" the charge nurse asked, fear breaking through. "I'm going to give them what they think they want," the protagonist replied. She walked